Hey everybody, I'm Jeffrey Way. Welcome back to a new edition of the Net.Tuts Plus Screencast of the Week. It's been a couple weeks. I've been focusing on a couple other things, but we are back and we are going to continue on with learning about making AJAX requests with raw JavaScript. Now, I know you can use jQuery, and it's very popular on this site especially, but always remember, jQuery is probably not going to be around forever. So if you did get started with JavaScript through jQuery, you need to make sure that you're learning both simultaneously. It's very important. Especially with JavaScript 2, you're just going to want to do that. Okay, so before we begin, please take a moment to subscribe to our RSS feed if you haven't already. The more subscribers we have, the more money we can place into hiring really high-level authors, really in-depth tutorials, more videos. So even if it's just one of you who subscribes, it really helps us. So I would greatly appreciate it, and if you do so, we'll continue doing these indefinitely. Now, also, if you'd like to follow us on Twitter, it's twitter.com/nettuts. I manage it. I post everything from just personal stupid facts to links, as well as updates on the site. Like for here, new screencast coming in about 12 hours. That was posted about 12 hours ago, so right on schedule. And also just links, Json Browser Security by Douglas Crockford. If you'd like, feel free to follow us. I would appreciate it. And lastly, we offer a Plus program at the Tuts Network. For $9 a month, you get access to just a huge number of premium tutorials from PSD Plus, Net Plus, Audio Plus, Flash, not Flash yet, and Vector Plus and AE Plus. And basically, you're going to get high-level video tutorials, high-level articles, freebies, downloads, just a really great deal. It's $9 a month. It's the cost of going out to lunch once a month, and you're going to drastically improve your knowledge. So if I wasn't running this, I would definitely subscribe and pay for a membership, and I hope you do too. It's a great investment. Think, you could go buy a book for $30 at Borders, or you could sign up here for 4 or 5 months, or 3 months. So let's get into it. We are going to be continuing on with our AJAX development tutorial. So what I'm going to do here is, I've already closed it out. I'm going to download the source code from that tutorial. So if you haven't already, go ahead and watch it. It's only about 20 minutes, and it'll show you the beginnings of how to make your first AJAX requests. So I'm going to click it right here, and I'm going to download the source code. And don't worry, if you don't want to watch it, I will briefly go over the code. And that's going to bring us this zip file. Close that out. And we're going to be working with PHP today, so I'm going to drag it into my htdocs folder. Like so. Alright, so let's get MAMP, open my start page, and it's called AJAX, right? And that's what we ended up with at the end of that lesson on May 8th. So let's continue. You can hear my dog in the background. Be quiet. So I'm going to be working with Netbeans, and if you haven't already, many of you guys have heard me brag about it on Twitter. It's really just a fantastic IDE, especially if you're working with a complicated projects, with classes and things like that. So why don't we open this up, websites, let's just drag that AJAX folder directly into it, like so. Okay, and here's index.html. So as you can see here, we have a function load, and we begin by creating a variable called XHR, and we're going to say if type of XML HTTP request is not undefined, XHR equals a new instance of the XML HTTP request object. Alright, so that's a mouthful, but it's really pretty interesting. XML HTTP request is the method for us to request pages asynchronously. Now that's going to work in all of your modern browsers, IE 7, Firefox 2+, Safari, Chrome, any of those is going to work. However, IE 6 does not recognize it. It uses its own implementation called the ActiveX object. So basically, using JavaScript, remember jQuery kind of abstracts all of this away for you, so you don't have to worry about it. But under the scenes, this is basically what it's doing in its own form. Let's clean this up here. Not sure how that happened. So, continuing on, basically, I'll clean that up later. Basically, we're saying if the XML HTTP request object exists, if it's not undefined, we know it's available to us, then set XHR equal to a new instance because we know we're working with a modern browser. Otherwise, we know we're working with i.e. 6 or below. And we begin by creating an array called versions. And these are all of the different ways that we pass into ActiveX object. And they're all just kind of updated versions. So you begin with Microsoft.xml HTTP, and that moves all the way up to 5.0. And we're going to filter through those because we want to get the best version. So we're going to cycle through this array. I equals 0, length equals the versions at the total number of items, and we're going to try to set this XHR equal to a new instance of the ActiveX object, and we're just going to pass in one of these, okay? Now, if there is an error, we know that, let's say, for instance, if this actually, to be honest, this should be in reverse. It should be 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Yeah, to be honest, I should have done that. The first one should be 5.0, then 4, then 3, then HTTP, and then the last one. So when you get this, I'm going to go ahead and switch this around. But we're going to try that, and if it's not available to us, we know we need to go back and go one down. So if we try it, if there is an error, we're just going to catch that error silently and not do anything with it. And then we're going to try the next one. And then we're going to try the next one, okay? Finally, we are going to call xhr.onReadyState. So it's going to change 4 states as the page is being requested. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 is when it's ready to go, when the request has been made. 0, 3 is when it's in the process of being made. So we're saying each time that state changes, call this function ensure readiness. And we are going to clean this up here. But quickly, if xhr.readystate is less than 4, we know we're not ready to go just yet. So we're just going to return, kind of break out of the function. Next, if xhr.status is not 200, we know there's a problem. Now, we could actually change that to if it's not 200 or between 200 and 300, or 304, I believe. You can use any of those in that range is a successful. But we're going to keep it simple here. So if it's not 200, we're going to return because it's not ready. And if it passes both of those if statements, we call if xhr.readystate equals 4, then we know we're all set to go and run our callback function, and we're going to pass in xhr. Okay, so to continue on ensure readiness, you can see here, what is this callback function? So if you search here, do you see anything about callback? Well, you see up here, it's accepted as the second argument, callback. So when we call this load function, callback will be a function that's passed as a second parameter. So when we are calling this function, we need to look here. All right, we're calling load, we're loading test.txt, and the callback function is right here. So callback right here is equal to this function, all right? And you see we're passing the XHR object, and we're receiving it right here. And then we are saying document.getElementById, get that container, which is right here, get this div, and set the inner HTML is equal to whatever is returned, and that's stored within this response text property, all right? It's really simple as that. So I'm going to get rid of this. We're only going to work with one. Before we get into working with JSON, we're also going to be working with prepared statements in PHP, so it's going to be kind of a good mix-up. Let's clean this up just a little bit, okay? So I'm going to close this out, and let's just refactor. Function load var xhr. Clean this up, and I'm also going to hit Shift Control F to auto format. And let's just go through it one line by line. If type of XML HTTP request is not undefined, then create a new instance of the XML HTTP request object. That looks good. We have our versions. That looks fine. We have this. That all looks good. This is kind of where I want to clean up. I wanted to keep it very obvious for you at first what we were checking, but we can combine all of this if we want. So, for instance, xhr.onReadyStateChange, if we want, we don't have to call a specific function. We can just make it an anonymous function. So, let's do it like this. Get rid of the name, and we're going to bring it all the way back here. All right. So, onReadyStateChange is equal to an anonymous function. So one thing I need to do is let's find the close, and we want to make sure this is still a declaration, so we need to end it with the semicolon. All right. The next one is, we can kind of group this up. It's best practice always to use the brackets, but here I know I'm not going to be editing it, so it's okay if we all put it on one line. It's really up to you. If xhr.readyState is less than 4, return. We'll say this. If xhr.readyState is less than 4, or xhr.status does not equal 200. And then, rather than using these brackets, we'll just put it all in one line. All right, so let's close that out, and we need to add one more. That should be good. So we're saying if this right here or this is true, then return, because we know we aren't ready to go. So you see we've grouped these together, and I can just get rid of this one entirely. We're refactoring our code. Now next, we know this is going to run if ready state is less than 4. So if we want, we could check if it's 4, but I don't think it's altogether necessary. And we could run an else statement. If this is equal, if any of these return true, return, else run our callback. But we know if those are true, it's automatically going to return, so we don't even need to do an if or an else, because we know if this code runs, all is well. So let's do this. Okay, and we can get rid of that. Okay, so we've cleaned it up quite a bit there. Some might consider it bad practice to get rid of the brackets. It's really just up to you. Determine what's best for your code. If you're going to be modifying these examples, yeah, it would be a big drag to have to go back and add those brackets. Here, I know I'm not going to be changing it anytime soon, so I think it's okay. All right, so that's enough refactoring, I think, for now. So what I'm going to show you how to do today is we're going to create a database, and we're going to use PHP to retrieve information from the database, convert it to JSON, and then we're going to use this code to asynchronously request that JSON text. It's going to return it, then it's going to parse the JSON and display it on the page. All right? So there's dozens of uses. I use this all the time, and if you're unfamiliar, I think this will really help you. So what I'll do here is projects. That's weird. There we go. Let's create a new page, and I'm going to get rid of another page and test, because we're not going to be using that. I'm going to create a new page, and we're going to call it emails.php. Open up our PHP tags. And what we're going to be doing is querying a database, but we need to have one first. And I've already gone ahead and created one for you. Let's go ahead and do it. Mamp, open start page, PHP myadmin. And I've created this database called AJAX tut. And I created one table. Don't worry, this is very simple. That's why I'm not doing it manually. I created a table called contact info. And if you want to browse it, you can see I created an ID that's going to auto increment, and it's a primary key. Then I created a name and an email field, and I populated it with just my name and my email address. All right? Very, very simple, and that's all there is to it. So we're going to come back here and begin connecting to our database. So let's do MySQL. It's going to be equal to a new instance of the MySQLi object, and we need to pass in our host. In my case, it's just localhost. Username and password on this computer is root. You want to make sure if it's on a server, definitely lock that down. It's very important. And the name of the database we're grabbing is AJAX tut, as I said. Now, if that does not perform successfully, let's die, and we'll write. There was a problem. You guys have seen me do this many times, so should be second for you. Next, we're going to query the database. So we'll say if result is going to be equal to MySQL query, and we need to create our query. All we're going to do for this example is just query the entire database. So we'll just select all, keeping it very simple. It's mainly just for our JavaScript example. So select all from contact info. All right. So if that is performed successfully, we know we can run some code, but if it doesn't, we need to do something. So else error occurred, and why don't we do just something like echo error and MySQL error. All right. So if I hover over this, it's saying right now, possible accidental assignment. This is one nice thing that Netbeans is, it's constantly analyzing your code to let you know possible issues that you could run into. And here it's just saying, it's just a warning, and it's saying it's possible that an accidental assignment could occur, maybe if this was null. So if we wanted to be more safe, we could wrap this all and then say if it does not equal null. All right? But we're not going to do that because it's just a warning, and I want to keep this somewhat simple, and the code will still run just fine. So we are going to be grabbing this information from the database and converting it to JSON. So let's do this. While, create a new variable called row, and that's going to be equal to result. Result, remember, is equal to what was returned from that query. And we are going to do a fetch object. We're going to grab that information and convert it to an object form so that we can work with it. We will do next. Basically, what we're going to be doing is echo Json Encode. This is a PHP function that will take a string of text or anything, and it's going to convert it into JSON. So we're going to take that entire row that was retrieved, and it's going to convert it. And for now, we're just going to echo it onto the page. So we are going to be updating this quite a bit, but for now, let's see what we end up with. So I'm going to go into Firefox, and here, and we called it emails.php. Okay, and this is what was returned. Now you can see here the JSON encode took care of that for us. So for instance, if I got rid of JSON encode and I did print R, come back, you can see here we have ID is 1, so it's an array. Name is Jeffrey Way, email is Jeffrey Way, at whatever. But by JSON encoding it, it goes and takes care of the process of creating the JSON format. So we could do it manually, or we could do it like this. Now, a couple things to take note of. When working with JSON, notice how these keys are wrapped in quotes. That is required for JSON. There is a reason for it, and I just can't remember. I remember reading why they had to do that, but it's just something stupid that's not necessary, but you need to do it, so wrap your keys within double quotes. Next, we are going to be having more than one of these, so each row is going to be wrapped within these curly braces. So why don't we do this real quick? Let's insert into this database. So contact info, insert, and let's add one more. The ID is auto increment, so we don't need to add it. And I'm just going to write nettuts and our email address. Click go. So now, if I go back to browse, we have 2 items in our database. And if I refresh the page, you'll now see that we have 2. But these aren't grouped together. There's a couple things. One, I want these to be separated by a comma to show that it's a string. And also, we can't just return a bunch of objects. So we should wrap all of our objects within an array. That way, we can just return that array, and it'll contain each one. And that's obviously why we're adding the comma. So the way I'm going to do that, there might be a better way, and if there is, leave a comment and let me know. What we'll do here is we're going to echo the beginnings of an array, like so, and then we're going to run our while statement. We're going to JSON encode row, and then at the very end, right here, we're going to do echo the closing. So if I come back and refresh the page, now you can see we've wrapped everything within an array, but we still need to add this comma. Now, my guess is there is an easier way, but the way I was doing it is within the while statement I'm doing if we're going to have to create a variable up here called I. So we'll do that, I equals 1. And we're going to say if I does not equal result num rows, result contains this property called num rows, and that contains the total number of rows that were returned from the database. So in this instance, num rows would be equal to 2. Come back. So we're saying if I does not equal that, then we know we need to add a comma. But if I does equal the total number, we know it's the very last, whoops, skip this version. We know it's the very last string right here. All right? in which case we don't need to add a comma. So if that returns true, we'll just do this all on one line, echo JSON encode, and we're going to encode our row as well as a comma at the very end. Okay. Otherwise, we know we're at the end of our statement, and I'm sorry, not the end of our statement, the end of our objects, and we can just echo JSON encode row without the comma. I think that should work. You can get rid of that one. And then finally, of course, we need to do I++. Okay. We could also do a for statement. So refresh the page, yeah. And you can see we have an array, so we're just going to return this one object. And then within the array, we have these items. So we have this one separated by a comma, but you notice this last one does not have a comma. Okay, so that looks pretty good for this. We have our information, we're echoing it out. Now we just want to asynchronously request this page with JavaScript. So one thing I'm going to do here is change this from index.html and to PHP. So we'll go up here to rename, and it's going to be index.php. Yeah, I thought it wouldn't do that. This is kind of a weird thing. Other programs let you just reassign the prefix or the suffix. Let's go ahead and close that out, and we'll create a new page. New. I think it's because I'm not actually working within a Netbeans project. So paste that in, and now we have index.php. If we go right here, index, we have our information. So we know when we request emails.php, it's going to return code with in the JSON format. So we need to prepare for that. So what I'm going to do is just get rid of all of this right here. And I'm going to say load. This is our load function that we created in the previous lesson. And this time we're going to load emails.php. So emails.php, actually, yeah, it's emails.php. And when that's loaded, we're going to run a callback function. And as before, we're going to accept the AJAX object, which allows us access to the response text. All right. So what we'll do a couple things is we're going to create a variable called response, and we need a way to parse through this the returned JSON. Now it's actually, I believe, implemented in the very nightly builds of Safari and maybe Firefox, but it still doesn't compensate for other browsers. So we really need a good JSON parser. You could create one yourself, or Douglas Crockford, who coined JSON, went ahead and created his own parser that we'll use. And I think it's called json.org/json.html, maybe? Yeah, here we go. Well, maybe not. Maybe it was JSON2. Here it is, json2.js. And this is the parser. So what we can do here is copy this, come back to our projects, create a new file, empty file, and we'll call it parse.js, paste that in, and then finally reference that within our head tag. So script type equals text/JavaScript, source equals parse.js. Come back, refresh the page, let's open up Firebug, and we're not getting any errors, so that should be fine. Except, let's obviously make sure that we close that out. Okay, so let's come back now. Now that we have imported Douglas's parse.js file, we can have access to a new global object called JSON, and it easily allows us to parse it, so it's a really nice feature. So var response is going to be equal to JSON. This is the new object that we have access to only because of importing that script, and we're going to parse it. And what are we going to parse? We can add any kind of string. Obviously, it should be in the JSON format. We know that when we request emails.php, it's going to echo out that JSON format, so we can do xhr.responseText, because we're going to asynchronously request this page, and the returned data is going to be stored in response.text. Okay? So close that out, and let's do one more, var container, and that's going to be equal to document.get element by ID, and we're going to get that container div. But also, we're going to have a string of items. So I'm going to change this from a div make it a little more semantic since we have a list of items to an unordered list. All right. So var container equals document.getElement by ID container. Now we've stored that in a variable, and now let's just loop through it. So for var I equals 0, and always len is going to be equal to response.length. That's the total number of items that was returned, and I is less than length, I plus plus. All right, and within here, we're going to do get that container unordered list, and we're going to set the inner HTML, and that's going to be equal to, we're just going to add our code rather than creating it with JavaScript. We're just going to write it directly in. So inner HTML, we're going to append a list item, and we'll put this strong tag plus, clean this up real quick, plus response, and then I. Remember, response is kind of an array, and we can filter through that with I. So if we come back, we don't have it anymore. Let's go to emails. I know I'm being a little excessively instructive, but I want to make sure you understand. The response, so we have response 0 is going to be this one. Response 1 is going to be equal to that one. So we can do response I, and then we can just access it like we would a property. In this case, we want to make sure we get email or name. And name and email, those are taken directly from the database. You see ID, name, email, ID, name, email. All right, so we're going to get the name one, and then we're going to close out our strong tag, and let's do like a colon maybe, and then response I dot email, and then finally close out our list item. I think that should do it. So let's save that, come back to our page. There's probably going to be a mistake. Refresh the page. No, it works just fine. So if I open up, I don't think I have anything in Firebug to show you. You can see our GET request. This is what was returned. This is what was sent. You can see. So if we go into the DOM, here when we imported that script, it created that JSON object for us, and you see it gives us access to the parse and the stringify methods. All right. So it's really cool. And then finally get parse, that's where we grabbed that file. We echoed it out. So let's really just analyze. It's not been too tough, but it's when you analyze what we've done, we've created a database, we've queried that database using the MySQLi object, we have converted that returned data into the JSON format using Json Encode, which is a PHP method, then we've echoed that out. Then we have used raw JavaScript to asynchronously request that emails.php page. When it's returned as JSON, we imported a Json Parser, and we called the parse method, where is it? The parse method to filter through that returned data and allow us to access it almost in an OOP way. So we can call .name.email. So it's really incredible. For those of you that use jQuery, you know you can do this in about 2 to 4 lines, but it's important as always to know how to do it with raw JavaScript, and always remember it's not like you're always going to be writing this function load method. Most likely you'd have a utility functions file where you can just grab this and paste it, and then you just have that, something like that. So don't think you're always writing this code. For those of you interested, if we hover over this, Netbeans is only letting me know, be aware that XML HTTP request is not supported by all of your targeted browsers. And it's basically saying, hey, this ain't going to work in IE6, which is exactly why we do an if statement, and otherwise we use Microsoft's ActiveX object method. So the final thing I want to show you is a little getting offhand, but I'm a big fan of switching it up, and you know in NetTouch we're mostly PHP JavaScript people. So let's allow a way for the user to insert new items here. So why don't we do this? After our unordered list, let's create a div ID equals add new. By the way, this is probably the end of our JavaScript lesson. We're mostly going to be working with PHP at this point, so if you don't need that, thank you so much for watching. Otherwise, let's work a little bit more, have a little more fun. Add new, and we'll create a form. The method is going to be the post method. and the action is just going to be itself for now. And I don't want to do too much here. I'm just going to do an input type equals text, name equals name, value is going to, we're not going to use labels, we're going to keep this quick, so your name, and let's just put it in paragraph tags so we have some spacing. And the next one is going to be for their email address, so input type equals text, name equals email, and the value is going to be your email. And then finally we need a submit button, of course. So input type equals submit, and name equals submit, and value is going to be equal to enter. I think that's good. Let's come back, refresh the page. Yeah, very simple form. That'll do just fine. So what we want to do is when the page loads, we want to check to see if the submit form has been posted, and if it has, we are going to insert whatever was typed into these fields into the database. So let's do this all on one page to keep it simple. PHP. Ooh, I'm still using the new beta version of Netbeans, so there's a mistake every once in a while. If is set post submit. So if that submit button has been set, we know that the user has typed something into the text boxes and submitted it. Let's keep this simple, just so it's obvious. We're going to store these in arrays. So name, post name, and email equals post email. So basically what we're doing here is, I'm sure some of you guys know this, but name, we're grabbing the name fields right here. So get the post, and then we're passing in the value that we added. So name is name. Here name is email, so we're grabbing that one, and it's just going to grab whatever the value was entered into that text box. And I'm just doing it this way so it's very obvious what we're doing. Once again, we need to connect to the database, so we could use a class or we could just do it manually. MySQLi, localhost, root, and the name of the table was, the database was AJAX tut. And we're going to use prepared statements this time, and that will secure it. Almost 99%, a very secure method of working with databases. And it's what you should be using. Don't be using this MySQL connect kind of thing, unless you're doing something very simple and it's not very database intensive. And if you're doing a lot of database work, you need to be using prepared statements. So what we'll do here is we're going to say if, and we're going to create a new variable called statement equals MySQL, and we're going to prepare a query. And we'll just hard code this in. We're going to insert this time, insert into that table called contact info. I believe that's what we called it. Contact info. Yep, we're going to insert into that contact info, and the values, we're going to have 3 values, right? The first one is going to be the ID, but we know that's auto-incrementing, so we don't need to add anything there. So I'm just going to type null. And the next one is going to be the name, and the next one is going to be the email. And we're going to store those as question marks. So by doing it as question mark, we can then bind these values to it, but we don't have to worry about SQL injection. And once again, it's just letting us know about that possible accidental assignment, which we wanted to be best practice. We could wrap this all and make it sure that it's not equal to null. So we're going to do statement bind param, and this is where we attach our variables to our query. That way we're not putting, blatantly putting in whatever a user types right into our query. We are preparing it and we're binding it to. So much safer way. The first set is, it needs to know, we have 2 parameters to bind. It needs to know, are they integers, are they strings, is it a boolean? These are going to be strings, so we do S for string, because there's 2. And then we're going to do name, email. Pretty simple. Finally, we're going to call execute, and this actually runs the code. So if this was prepared successfully, execute the code. Otherwise, we know there was a problem. And as always, we can do echo error and MySQL error. Come back. Might have made a mistake. Did that kind of quick. Refresh the page. Nothing's going to run because it hasn't been posted, but let's do another one. Let's do ThemeForest, and my ThemeForest email is sitemanager@themeforest.net. Enter, and it just refreshed, but it didn't do anything. So let's check here, and we probably did make a mistake. So AJAX browse, and we know it was not added to the database. So what was the problem? And my guess is we have a problem with our query. Real quick, as always, we need to have a or die. Let's just write error for now. Prepare, insert into contact info values is null, question mark, question. Yeah, you see that in there? That shouldn't be in there. Stupid autocomplete always throws me up. So let's save that, and I think that should fix it. We'll try it again. No, it didn't. So let's debug a bit more, and we have this right here. And if we hover over it, syntax error, expected instance of. And I think we need one more just there. So we have our wrapping parentheses, and then we have our prepare parentheses, which ends right there, and then we have our values. So that can throw you up. You need 3 over there. Let's try it one more time. Hopefully that'll fix it. Once again, ThemeForest and Site Manager. Enter. And it is still not working. This is the fun stuff. Code, and yeah, of course. There needs to be an underscore right there. We're checking for post. That should work. So this time, let's refresh the page, and I'm going to type in ThemeForest and Site Manager at themeforest.net. Enter, and it did get added to the database. But this time we used prepared statements, and it's just a much more secure. It's potentially way faster, much more secure, and you can see here it's a great way that in this lesson we mixed the PHP with JavaScript to make asynchronous calls. So if you wanted, we could even have our JavaScript make a request to this to do it asynchronously, but I didn't think it was necessary here. So we've done a lot today, and I hope you enjoyed it. Please leave any questions that you might have in the comments, and if there's something else you want to learn with the AJAX raw JavaScript angle, I'd be more than happy to do a part 3. And by the way, I know that on this, you should really do much more error checking, validation to make sure that the name and the email input fields aren't empty, and you can do some regular expressions to make sure that it is an email address and all that. But I figured that was overkill for this kind of thing. So I will see you guys next week. Thank you so much. Bye.